Gran Turismo 7 is notorious for having some of the most expensive cars in racing game history. Couple this with a very unbalanced economy system and you end up with a pretty big deal on your hands in which players will have to grind 20 plus hours for a single car. And well, this got me thinking about the complete opposite. What are the absolute cheapest cars inside of Gran Turismo 7 and are they any good? And well, that is going to be the theme for today's video as I bring to you the 10 cheapest cars in GT7. But before we get into the list, I do want to explain the rules as to what makes a car the absolute cheapest in game. So as for the data collected here to work out the list, I use my own in-game knowledge as well as the Gran Turismo wiki to work out some of the data and statistics behind the cars. So here's how I worked it out. If a car is available at say the new and used car dealership, then I would get the average between the two prices. If it's a single dealership, it would just be that set standard price. Free cars are eligible, but no reward cars are. Every vehicle type is fully eligible for this, whether that's a car, a van, a car, a racing car, etc. As long as it was one of the outright cheapest cars in game, then it was fully eligible for this list. And well, speaking of cheap, well, I want to give a huge thank you to today's video sponsor, who is Raycon once again. I partnered with Raycon last year to do a review on their everyday earbuds, so a huge thank you to them once again for coming back a year later to allow me to keep my lights on and actually feed myself this month. Cheers Raycon. So let's talk about their everyday earbuds then. So I partnered with Raycon last year and they sent me a pair of their everyday earbuds for a review. And well, a year later, I still have them and I still use them every single day. Now, funnily enough, YouTube is not my full-time job. I do work a day job for upwards of 13, 14, even sometimes 15 hours a day. So some of these features are an absolute must, like 35 hours of battery life, water resistance, and awareness mode. Of course, there's nothing worse than your headphones dying on you during the day, and there's nothing worse than being out in all kinds of weather for them to get absolutely destroyed. And awareness mode, well, that comes in handy, so I know what's going on around me. Well, since we're on the topic of cheap things, that's exactly why they're sponsoring today's video, because these things cost a fraction of other brands. So if you're in the market for a pair of earbuds, I fully recommend picking up a pair of the Raycon everyday earbuds. It does exactly what it says on the tin. They're perfect for everyday use and cost a fraction of other brands. A huge thank you once again to Raycon for sponsoring the channel for a second time. Link in the description down below. Let's get back to the video then. So starting off this list at number 10 is the Suzuki Cappuccino, which will cost you 17,700 credits from the used car dealership. Now, as you can see on the surface, this looks no different from every other K car in the game, putting out a very little 62 brake horsepower. However, this is a clear example of GT7's car customization shining through, in which you can go ahead and pick up some ridiculous modifications and an engine swap for this thing, which makes it one of the best grinding cars in the entirety of GT7. And no, I'm not kidding. Whilst this isn't going to be the only standout car on this list, this is one that I will fully recommend to anyone that plays GT7, especially if you do have the spare credits for the rather expensive engine swap for this thing. It's fully worth it. I probably earned 10 to 15 million credits alone with this one single car, and for me that makes it an absolute bargain of a base vehicle. Fully recommend this. Moving in to number 9, we have the Toyota Aqua for an average price of 16,100 credits. Now, I took the prices by going ahead and averaging the brand central and used car dealership. However, when it comes to the Toyota Aqua, we've gone from very strong with the Suzuki Cappuccino to pretty damn average with this thing. Now, when you first ever start up Gran Turismo 7, this is going to be one of the starter vehicles you get to choose from, alongside the Honda Fit and the Mazda Demio. And whilst on the surface this looks to be the best car of the bunch, unfortunately after you've done the Sunday Cup races, this thing will basically fade away to absolute obscurity. You'll probably never ever use it again after those starter races, and I don't blame you. However, a little bit of weird trivia here: in the January 2025 update, Polyphony did actually update this car. However, it made it even worse than it already was. Again, it is fully let down by the hybrid system, which means that it's just typically a very slow car, and once the battery's gone, it's even slower. In at number 8 is one of the latest cars, or vans I should say, to Gran Turismo 7. That is the Renault Kangoo, with an average price of 15,750 credits. However, Is it the best thing in the world? Absolutely not. Is it the worst thing in the world? Absolutely not. I would say this is probably the epitome of absolutely average when it comes to Gran Turismo 7. Yes, it's pretty funny going around and racing a van, and fully upgraded, admittedly it is quite fun and does have the capability to beat supercars. Unfortunately, when that's kind of faded away, it becomes a pretty boring and dull affair. Maybe if this thing got a useful engine swap in the next update or the near future, I might feel a little bit differently about it, but unfortunately for now, it feels like it's fun for around about maybe 30 minutes to an hour, and then unfortunately when that fades away, it just becomes pretty dull. In at number 7, we have the Daihatsu Copen for 15,700 credits on average, and unfortunately, I would say this is probably the weakest K car in the entirety of Gran Turismo 7, and just like the Copen VGT, which is the weakest of the VGTs, I'd say, Daihatsu's lineup here just isn't very good. However, I have to give credit where it's due. The Copen is genuinely a car that I really like the look of. It's got this pretty cool bubble-like shape to it, and I think in terms of the styling, it's going to appeal to a lot of K-car fans. Unfortunately though, where it kind of falls flat is the performance and usability. When you've got things such as the Suzuki Cappuccino and the Honda Beat in game, unfortunately this thing just never really stood a chance. In 6th place, we have the Fiat 500 1.2 with a 15,400 credit average. I like to call this one kind of the forgotten 500, as it seems to get absolutely no attention or love whatsoever. I get it's the more modern variant, and typically it's not as quirky looking or even as good looking as the original. However, when it comes to upgrades and such, it does actually perform to a relatively good standard. It doesn't necessarily excel at any set PP rating, but you can make this a relatively good little kind of super mini track day car. I would honestly say if you haven't ever tried this thing, go ahead, pick it up for the bargain price and then put some upgrades on it and really fine tune it. You can probably find yourself having a decent amount of fun here. In at number 5 is the Honda Beat for an average of 15,000 credits from the used car dealership. Again, it does change slightly from update to update. I picked one up last August for 14,400 credits, so I averaged it out to be around about 15k. Now in terms of the car itself, I think we'll all know this is perhaps the ultimate AFK grinding car. Coupling this thing with Daytona and the K20 engine swap is an absolute match made in heaven, and it's probably the car that the majority of GT7 players now have made the most credits with. Although I would say it's incredibly close between the Cappuccino and the Honda Beat, for me the Honda Beat is my favourite K car in the entirety of GT7. If you haven't checked this thing out, it's incredibly usable, it looks insanely quirky, and for me it's a bit of a Gran Turismo classic. Just missing out on a podium position in 4th place is the Suzuki Swift Sport from 2007 with an average of 14,937 credits. For me, this is once again an example of a pretty decent cheap car in game, especially early game. Yes, it's front wheel drive. No, it's not on the exact same level as the Swift Sport from 2017, but it will quite happily be upgraded to a reasonable standard and actually pretty usable. And considering just how cheap the price tag is for this thing, I would fully recommend every single GT7 player go ahead and pick this thing up at some point. You'll probably be pleasantly surprised. Narrowly taking the bronze prize for this one is the Honda Fit at 14,900 credit average. Again, one of the starter vehicles to Gran Turismo 7. Unfortunately, also one of the weakest. Once again, because it's a hybrid. Again, when it comes to the starter vehicles in GT7, I fully recommend the Demio over anything else. Again, once the charge in this thing is gone, it's entirely useless. Unfortunately, it can be upgraded to a relatively decent standard, but again, it is just let down by how GT7 handles its hybrid systems in game. I just kind of wish when it came to the Honda Fit, we got the better and cooler versions from some of the older Gran Turismo titles. Unfortunately, we're kind of left with the hybrid version here, and it's just not very good whatsoever. Taking silver though is the Gran Turismo 125 shifter kart for 10,000 credits from Brand Central. Perhaps the cheapest race going vehicle in the entirety of GT7, this thing is an absolute bargain. However, I do feel when it comes to the player base, it's a very love it or hate it situation. For me, I'm in the camp that absolutely loves this thing. I think it goes well at a bunch of different tracks, and it's surprising just how much performance you can get out. As well, if you can go ahead and get a player lobby together to get a bunch of you throwing these things around, then it is absolutely amazing. And well, VR players, you'll probably absolutely love this one. So honestly, yeah, I'd fully recommend this one, and I hope one day Polyphony actually turn around and release a full menu book centered around the 125 shifter car. So taking first place and gold is going to be the Toyota Hymedic and the Feeler, which are both entirely free. Yes, it's a joint first position. Again, when it comes to both of these vehicles, I would say they're pretty terrible overall. I would say the Hymedic is the better of the two because it has sirens and goes Nino. Unfortunately, as for the Feeler though, that is the complete opposite. This is probably one of the most useless vehicles in game. Admittedly, it looks pretty quirky and reminds me of something straight out of Ridge Racer, but again, as soon as tyres and fuel are turned on, this thing is going to run out of battery inside a lap, and well, that's going to be race over. It is a shame, like I said, I do genuinely think it's a decent looking car. It has this very bulky kind of late 90s, early 2000s feel to it, put in a modern electric package. But unfortunately, again, that electric motor is going to be its downfall. As for the Hymedic, like I said, it's pretty quirky and it actually can be upgraded, so it can be to some use. But unfortunately, because it's so heavy and so slow to begin with, it's not really going to be competitive anyway. But like I said, it has sirens and it goes Nino. And there we go, that is the top 10 cheapest cars in Gran Turismo 7. If there's any other top 10, top 5 lists you want to see, let me know in the comment section down below. Huge thank you to all of my channel members on screen now. Again, a huge thank you to every single one of you that has watched this video, and a thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video so I can go ahead and keep my lights on and actually feed myself this month. I'll see you in the next one. Take care guys, peace.